Hello, and welcome to the Freight Flow Advisor Brief. If you're no stranger to the show, you know we like to cover emerging tech in supply chain and freight. So when I came across this story last week, I just had to talk about it. Today's episode is about a ship that on paper doesn't look too impressive. It's certainly not the biggest box ship. It's not crossing the Pacific. It's not running 20,000 TEUs to Europe, but it may be one of the most important ships in the decarbonization story so far. I'm talking about China's Ning Yuan Dian Kun, which is said to be the world's largest all-electric container ship. And more importantly, is the fact that it's already moved to sea trials on real coastal freight corridors in the Zhejiang province. So why does this ship matter? Well, let's start with the basics. It's a 10,000-ton class feeder ship. It's around 127.8 meters long and 21.6 meters in width. It carries roughly 740 to 742 TEUs. So it's not the largest container vessel out there. But what makes it different is that it's powered by electricity. According to coverage in Marine Insight and The Driven, the ship uses 10 container-shaped battery units with a total capacity of about 19 megawatt hours. Those units can be recharged via shore power or swapped out in port, and they drive permanent magnet propulsion motors instead of a conventional two-stroke engine. China Daily and other outlets report that after sea trials earlier this year, the ship entered commercial coastal service in April of 2026, running routes between Ningbo, Zhoushan, and other ports in Zhejiang. And that's the real pivot point. It's not tied up somewhere waiting for a press event. It's doing the unglamorous work of moving boxes up and down the coast. And here's a stat that should make anyone sit up. Chinese sources say that the vessel is expected to save around 580 tons of fuel per year and cut CO2 emissions by more than 1,400 tons annually on its current routes. Now, 1,400 tons of CO2 is not going to decarbonize global shipping, but that's not the point here. The point is, this is a live working example of battery electric propulsion at scale in the part of the market where the physics and economics actually line up, short sea feeder trades. Now, let me be blunt. We should not read this story as all ships are going electric, but we should read it as battery electric is now good enough in the right corridors that serious operators are willing to bet real assets on it. There's a big difference here. A team led by researchers at Berkeley Lab recently looked at domestic shipping in the US and found that electrifying a large share of shorter routes could cut maritime CO2 emissions by 34 to 73% by 2035 and be cost effective under high grid decarbonization scenarios. Earlier work in Nature Energy argued that at battery prices around $100 per kilowatt hour, electrifying intra-regional trade routes under 1,500 kilometers is economical with minimal impact on carrying capacity. So the translation here is you don't need to solve the entire deep sea problem for battery ships to start making business sense. You just need repeatable routes, controllable distances, and ports with enough power and real estate to play the energy game. And I think that's exactly what this ship is doing. Several reports describe the ship as an intelligent container ship with autonomous navigation functions, route planning, collision avoidance, and integrated energy management. It's not swapping fuel for electrons. It's embedding more software into how the ship actually runs. And there is a human angle here too. Multiple captains have been quoted in China saying that compared with conventional vessels, the most noticeable change is the lack of machinery noise. Voyages are almost silent. The environment is more relaxed, and it helps the crew concentrate better on operations. That sounds soft, but anyone who's managed ships knows crew conditions, fatigue, and workload are operational variables, not just HR talking points. So my opinion is this. The new electric ship is not important because it's the biggest. It's important because it's the first convincing case study of battery electric work where the network is predictable and infrastructure can be concentrated. So if you're a ship owner, port authority, or investor still treating electric shipping as a distance science project, this is really your wake-up call, or maybe your wake-up corridor. So we'll come back to what all this means for your strategy here in a sec. But first, I want to walk through something very close to the conversation, how you actually run numbers on moves like this. So This episode is brought to you by Freight FA and specifically by Freight GPT, our AI engine for cost and pricing intelligence in freight. Here's the reality. When a ship like the Ning Yuan enters service, your spreadsheet doesn't keep up. You're suddenly dealing with new fuel profiles, different port dwell patterns, battery swap versus shore charge trade offs, CO2 and fuel. And I want you to understand that Freight GPT is built for exactly that kind of shift. You can ask it questions the way you talk to your best pricing analyst. Like, what happens to my total landed costs if I move this coastal leg from diesel to electric feeder profile? Now, under the hood, Freight GPT is ingesting market data, real live market trends, and news, as well as your own cost structures and current rate environments to give you transparent, explainable answers, not black box magic. And on pricing, that matters. Because in the market where some operators will run conventional feeders and others will experiment with electric, the winners are going to be the ones who can see the cost curve clearly, price dynamically against it, and explain those choices to boards, customers, and lenders. Freight FA is priced so that you don't need a consulting budget to get this level of intelligence. Think in terms of a single mid-level hire per year, but working 24/7, answering questions across ocean, air, and truck, and never asking for a coffee break. Additionally, if you're trying to model decarbonization and margin at the same time, Freight GPT is the fastest way to move from we should look into this to here's the scenario analysis. You can see it in action at freightfa.com. That's freightfa.com. Once you're there, just click Freight GPT and drop in one of your questions. All right, back to the electric ship. Let's talk about where the investable value actually sits. Because the investment story here is not go buy electric ships. The investment story is ports that can provide reliable, high voltage shore power and safe battery handling are going to become more attractive nodes for short sea networks. Ship owners who design feeder fleets around specific corridors and they match vessel size, battery capacity, and schedule to those corridors will have a defensible cost and compliance position. Technology and energy providers that can standardize containerized battery systems, safety cases, and orchestrate software will have an asset class, not just a one-off project. Several analyses from Maersk for zero carbon shipping argued that targeting smaller vessels on short voyages for partial or full electrification can address up to roughly 17% of current CO2 emissions in certain segments, while using renewable energy more efficiently than many synthetic fuels. In other words, a relatively small part of a fleet could deliver disproportionate share of emissions benefit if, and this is a big if, you pick the right routes and build the right infrastructure. The Ning Yuan is essentially a live test for this thesis. It's not trying to do everything, it's trying to run one thing very well. A specific regional pattern on electricity with battery swapping as a way to de-risk dwell time. Now let's talk about the human and operational layer really quickly. There's one more part of this story I don't want to lose in the noise of megawatts and tons of CO2. It's operations. China Daily quotes that on an electric ship, the noise drops dramatically and crew can focus better because they're not constantly fighting vibration and engine roar. That might sound marginal, but over thousands of hours at sea, it's a material change in working conditions. And at the same time, they point out that the operating discipline shifts. Crews have to think more actively about speed profiles and power consumption and route planning because energy is a more visible constraint. That has real world implications for training and for shore planning teams. Also, for how we manage risk. Let's not forget about the autonomy layer, where there is route planning and collision avoidance described in trade coverage. That adds another dimension. You're not just changing fuel, you're changing the way decisions are made on the bridge and in the control room. So if you're a shipping company executive, the question isn't, do I believe in electric ships? The question is, am I building an operating model and systems and skills to run corridors like this when they become competitive? Because it's no longer a theoretical question. So let's bring it home. My view is that the ship will age in the history books the way a lot of firsts do in freight. Modest in size, forgettable to the general public, but incredibly important in the hindsight. It's a reminder that transitions in this industry almost never start with the biggest, flashiest assets. They start with corridors where the physics and economics, as well as the politics, line up just enough for someone to try. Battery electric feeders won't replace everything, but for a slice of global trade, Coastal corridors, dense regional networks, intra-regional trade, the combination of falling battery costs, cleaner grid, and regulatory pressure is starting to create real options. So you should really ask yourself if waiting for more certainty is actually the riskiest move in the current market. That is beginning to reward early, credible decarbonization plays. If you want a place to start running those numbers and ideas, make sure to check out freightfa.com and take Freight GPT for a spin. Listen, if you've enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share it with a colleague. Also, head over to Facebook or LinkedIn and search out the Freight Flow Advisor and give us a follow. Now, if you really want to dive into China's electrical ship, head over to substack.com, search the Freight FA brief, and we've attached a curated article to this podcast that breaks down everything in further detail. While you're there, don't forget to subscribe. And lastly, you can listen to this podcast on Apple and Spotify, and now you can watch us on YouTube. Until next time, this has been your Freight Flow Advisor Brief.